Now this is Fabian Hurzeler, and if you've never heard of his name, then I'll forgive you, because until November, nor had I. Now I actually want to start this video off with a bit of a quiz. What does Fabian Hurzeler, Harry Maguire, Loris Karius and Paulo Dybala all have in common? Now whilst you're thinking, make sure you drop a like on this video, hit that subscribe button, we're on the road to 1k. Now if you answered they're all once the best in the world in their position, then you would be incorrect. Because Paulo Dybala was never the best striker in the world. No, I'm joking. They were all born in 1993. Who guessed that? Bonus points for you if you guessed that. Yes, Hurzeler is only 31 years old. And not surprisingly, he is the youngest manager to ever manage in the Premier League after he took the Brighton job earlier this summer. And yes, he will be managing James Milner, who is about 7 years older than he is. But despite his age, I actually think he's got some pretty interesting tactics that could change the style of play in the Premier League. So in this video, I want to take a little bit of a look at who Fabian Hurzeler is, what the lineup we could see for Brighton is next season, and the tactics that he might use. So who is Fabian Hurzeler? The 31-year-old was born in Houston, Texas, out in the USA, but actually began his footballing career in the academy at Bayern Munich, where he played for Bayern Munich too. He had a bit of a career at the lower levels of German football, but he pretty much retired from full-time football at the age of only 23, before he began then putting focus on becoming a coach and looking at the other stuff involved in football. But fun fact, he actually played alongside Emre Can in Bayern Munich's youth system. However, at the age of 23, he joined FC Pippinsried. I have no idea if I pronounced that correctly. But he joined as a player coach. And he also, I believe, joined the German under-20s development as well. I think he became a coach there too. But he ended up in St. Pauli in 2020 as the assistant manager to Timo Schultz. Brilliant surname, by the way. But towards the end of 2022, Timo Schultz was fired. And so Fabian Hurzeler was announced interim manager. But eventually he ended up getting the full-time job. Now, St. Pauli have done pretty well since this change, but this season specifically, or the season just gone, they pretty much dominated Bundesliga 2, finishing the league top with 69 points. This was only just ahead of Holstein Kiel, but it was a massive improvement from the season before where they finished 5th. But in a way, the way that they won this league the season just gone was a lot more interesting because of the tactics used. They were pretty weird and they kind of put St. Pauli a bit more in the public eye because of how they were playing. For example, who needs a midfield when you can just not have one? You know, we'll get on that a little bit more later, but just imagine a squad without a midfield. That is what we were seeing at times from Hurzeler's St. Pauli. That is why his tactics were so bizarre. And we know Brighton like to make some pretty data-driven, evidence-based signings, as we've seen with the likes of Caicedo, Mitoma, Adingra. They're really good at finding young talents and making them superstars. But they do the same with managers. I mean, Zerbi wasn't exactly a massive name in the managerial scene, but he is now because of his work at Brighton. And of course, he was getting praise from people like Pep Guardiola as well, who was saying he was a fantastic manager. It shows you how good De Zerbi actually was, and Brighton were able to identify him. And I think they could have done a similar thing here with Fabian Hurzeler. I think he could be one to keep an eye on. But how will he line up this Brighton squad? Let's take a bit more of a deeper look. Starting off in goal, I think this is probably the easiest one to go with, pretty much. I think he's going to go with Verbruggen. I don't think there's too much to argue about that one. He's a good shot stopper. He's good with his feet. Obviously, he's playing for the Dutch national team at the moment. I just think he's really good at doing the job. He's about the right level at Brighton. I don't think he's a world-class goalkeeper, but I'm sure Hurzeler will be happy to keep him in between the sticks. Now, Hurzeler lines his team up in, I'm going to say for now, it's a 3-4-3. We'll touch more on the tactics and the movements a little bit later on. But each one of the centre-backs has a crucial role to play in the build-up. Now, at St. Pauli, it was Val, Smith and Metz who played as the back three, and they had to be really comfortable with playing out from the back with their passing range and their movements. They had to be confident to carry the ball forward, and even at times pushing into the midfield. But not only this, they were also really tall and quite imposing in their body type and size. I think they were all over 6 foot, and I think Smith and Metz both averaged over 5.8 progressive passes per 90, which I believe was in the top 5% in the league. They were really really impressive at playing out from the back and pushing high. So the question is, who at the Brighton squad can do this? I've thought long and hard. I feel like I've gone with the pretty obvious choice though. At the right centre-back, I've gone with Webster. I think he can do that role pretty well. I know he's more played on the left of the centre-back too at times, but I think he's going to be perfect in this right-sided centre-back position. And on the left-hand side, I've gone with Igor. I think he's really good at playing with the ball. I'm not saying he's the best ball player ever, and I do think Estupiñán could play this role at times as well if needed. But I think Igor's a really good option to have, especially because he's left-footed and can play on the left of that back three. And then in the middle, and this is the man that has to be comfortable pushing up higher into the midfield, I've gone with Lewis Dunk, the man currently out in Germany with England. I think he could push high and get his team up the pitch pretty effectively. We've seen, based on his stats and just from watching him, he is quite good at carrying the ball forward. So maybe he can be that player that pushes into the midfield when needed in transition. As for the wing-backs, both of them have to be able to defend very wide. They have to stay as a wing-back in their defensive shape, but going forward, they have to be able to invert. Not just one of them, they both have to invert and become central, which is why I think this decision is a bit harder, because obviously you look at the likes of Tariq Lamptey, I don't necessarily think he's someone that's able to do that. So I have considered who could do this. And on the left-hand side, I've gone with Estupiñán. I think he's going to be able to do that pretty well. I don't think there's too many complaints about him. I believe he's able to get forward pretty effectively, but also just drift centrally. I don't think he'll be too bad at that. On the right-hand side, based on the current Brighton squad, I've gone with Solly March. I know that sounds a bit weird. I think he had a really good season. Was it maybe not last season, the season before? He was brilliant. He was really good going forward. But we also have seen him play as a wing-back before at Brighton, so I don't see a reason why he couldn't play in this position now. However, I don't love this. I don't think he's the best option. I really wanted to put Pascal Gross in this position, actually. But I believe he's going to Dortmund or something, so I've tried to not put Gross into this lineup. I don't love Solly March in this position, so my alternative is actually Kyle Walker-Peters. What he's done at Southampton has been brilliant. He's a really nice guy as well. Have met him, loved him. But I think he's a really good option to have on this right-hand side of the pitch. I think he's able to play both left and right side, which is good for defensive cover. But personally, I think going forward and also inverting, we have seen him do it at times for Southampton. He can both invert and stay wide. He's not phenomenal at everything, but he's able to do everything, and I think that's something that that Brighton need in this position. God, I'm getting my teams mixed up now. Now, as for the midfield too, they have to be rather attacking minded. At St. Pauli, I believe it was Irvine and Hartel. They combined to get 27 goals and 23 assists between them last season, as they are allowed to push higher into the half spaces and really get involved in the attack. So we need attacking players that can go into this position. Now, conveniently, for one side of the midfield, I was considering between three options when I first started planning this video. One was Hartel, who was obviously at St. Pauli with Hurzeler and did this role really well. One was Kieran Dewsbury-Hall, who obviously has now been snatched by Chelsea. Go and check my video out on why they've done that if you want to see that. And my third option was Wifer, or Vifer, or Wifer. I don't know how you pronounce it. We're going to go with the Wifer. Of Feyenoord. I think he's a really good option as both going forward, but he is a bit more defensive. He can do that defensive role really well. So as a box-to-box, he was an option I really liked. Conveniently, after the Dewsbury-Hall move fell through, Brighton then went and signed Mats Wifer for £30 million. So in he comes, nice and easy. He's going to play as my number 8, but also defensive. My other option, I'm actually going to put him on the right. My other option for the midfield, it depends on the state of the game, I think. And I mean this in two ways. For starters, if you're winning 2 or 3-0, you want to defend a lead. I think the best option would be Baleba. I think just as a defensive midfielder, I know he's not necessarily going to push up, but it means that you can keep Dunk as a centre-back and still keep a 3-3-4 shape instead when you do go forward. I think he's just a bit better at providing that defensive cover compared to the other option that I'm going to suggest. And this might shock you. I'm going with Enciso. I know he's not really a midfielder, he's more of an attacker. Now, he's not getting on either wing for me, so I do want to try and include him in this team, but also when you look at what Hartel and Irvine have done at St. Pauli, he's a bit more attacking minded than what they were. I don't think he can do the defensive job as well, but when you've got someone like Mats Wifer alongside you, I do think he's got the freedom to go forward a bit more. There's not much defensive responsibility of that position, why not give it a go? Why not just let him have that freedom to push higher and get involved in the attack in the half spaces? Rather than being wide, which he has been before, let him get into the half spaces. Play as number 8, play him as a number 10, and we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work, then obviously I do think some alternatives will be needed. Again, I really liked Pascal Gross for this position, but I don't think he's going to be there. So he was my next best option. Now, going into the attack, the striker generally has to drop a bit deeper, whilst the wingers can then both provide the width, or if they want to, cut inside, attack the box and get shots, get on the edge of the box for a cross. That's the kind of players that Hurzeler used at St. Pauli, and I've tried to consider who will be best at doing each of them roles among this Brighton squad. Now, for me, I think I'm going to start on the left-hand side. I think it's a pretty obvious choice. I know they've made some signings recently, but for me, I think the left-hand side has to be Mitoma. I think if he needs to provide the width, he can. He can happily stay out here, as Enciso then attacks high, but he can also attack the box with that right foot, give him a ball, and get a shot away like this, or fade across in towards the back post. I think he's more than capable of doing that, and I really like him as that option. We know he's a phenomenal ball carrier. I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be starting for this Brighton team. Up front, it was pretty much a debate between Welbeck, Ferguson and Pedro. In this dropping deeper role, someone that's going to get a lot of touches, get involved in the build-up play, link the entire attack and the midfield together, I've gone with this man, João Pedro. We know he's brilliant at penalties, so that's number one why he's on the pitch, but also I think just as coming a bit deeper to allow Mitoma to then come into this position, and you'll see who I'm about to suggest as right wing as well, it just means he's able to get a lot more touches, and I don't think Ferguson or Welbeck are that kind of player. And I also think he's got a good enough profile to stay as a striker as well for crosses into the box. I mean, he's a brilliant finisher in the box. He can put any shot away. I think he's a really good striker. I'm a massive fan of João Pedro, and for me, he starts up front in this Brighton team. And then finally, going on to the right-hand side, this is a difficult one, and I also think probably a pretty rotational one, in the sense that originally I was going to put a Dingra. Providing the width, I think he's a good option, as Mats FIFA does want to push high, but I understand he's right-footed on the right-hand side, and you've got a right footer on the left-hand side. Now, I think he'll be great at attacking the line and putting a cross into the box, but he's not necessarily as good on this right-hand side at then getting the ball and getting a shot away. So we're going to look at one of the new Brighton signings, technically from Newcastle, but also from Feyenoord like Mats FIFA. That is Minter, the left-footed, I believe 19-year-old Gambian winger, who is really impressive. He's impressed me a lot at Feyenoord this season. When I had a look at Arne Slot's tactics for my Arne Slot at Liverpool video, go and check that out if you want to see that. I think Minter was phenomenal. I really like how he gets involved in the play. He's almost a bit like a second striker as well. And he's left-footed. So again, he can get into this position. If João Pedro drags defenders out, it opens up these channels for Mitoma and Minter to attack, or for Enciso and FIFA to get into. And of course, Walker-Peters can provide that width instead if FIFA stays deep. And Minter is able to get shots away on that left foot, find that far post, which is a kind of shot that we see so often. You look at the likes of Bukayo Saka and Cole Palmer, they do that kind of job. Attack the half space, get it onto the left foot, put a cross in, or find that far post. I think Minter's going to be the player to do that. And so this is my lineup for Brighton next season under Hurzeler. But what are the tactics and how are they going to play with and without the ball? So as I said, Hurzeler's team set up in this 3-4-3 formation, but in reality, it's never really a 3-4-3. We see a lot of different shapes throughout the games. It can be 4-3-3s, 5-2-3s, 2-3-5s, 5-4-1s. We see them all. They're pretty common in Hurzeler's lineups. So the 3-4-3 is a bit deceiving. It probably won't stay like this for that long. So we're going to start with the ball. How do Brighton play with the ball under Fabian Hurzeler? There's a lot of emphasis on fluidity and positional shifts. When one player moves out of position, someone else fills it. There's a lot of attacking the space. That's a pretty strong emphasis throughout this squad. Hurzeler's ethos is pretty much where there's a space. If you see an opportunity to attack it, and then one of your teammates will bail you out by covering the space you've just left. And I like that philosophy a lot. I think it's a really progressive and forward-thinking style of play, which I think could be a different style that we've seen in the Premier League. But we see a lot of encouragement as well for playing out from the back, which obviously is very common. And they often play out in a 4 at the back shape. Now, whether that's one of the centre-backs pushing high to create this position, that's not unusual. Or it can just be one of the... And this is why I've gone with Webster and Igor as the 2 wide players, because I think they can also play fullback whilst playing out. It can also be something like this. But there's a lot of emphasis on playing out. They build out almost in a 4-3-3, and they're happy to keep possession a hell of a lot. They'll knock the ball, they'll almost horseshoe it along that back line consistently to bait the opposition's press. And it works really well, because I think we've seen at St. Pauli, they do this so often. They're happy to just waste time with the ball at the back until the opposition really come close to them, and then they'll try and find that spare man. And St. Pauli last season had the second most possession per game. I believe it was just under 57%. And I do think Brighton are going to adapt this style of play where they dominate the ball a lot. And a lot of emphasis is going to come out through playing out from the back, which is why you need centre-backs that are so comfortable on the ball. By the way, this style is very similar to what we saw Zerbi use, so no surprise that Brighton liked it when they watched Fabian Hurzeler. But in transition, this is where the midfielders have to be so comfortable pushing forward. You see the 5 attacking shape come from Vifa and Enciso, or whoever the 2 double pivots are, attacking the half spaces as the 2 wingers then provide the width and stretch the defence. So you see this 5 shape here. The question is, what build-up shape do they then create? As I mentioned, one of the centre-backs pushes high into the midfield, and actually the both fullbacks invert, so you almost end up with a 2-3-5, a bit like this, and they use the goalkeeper as the 3rd centre-back. I don't think Verbruggen's going to necessarily have to be really advanced, but I do think he'll be used as the spare man in build-up, and it allows them to still defend transitions with 5 players, as you can see here, but they also attack with 5. So they've got that defensive solidity still. And it's a shape that we don't see too often. We see this 3-2 shape quite a lot, but normally it's a midfielder and then one of the fullbacks inverting. Instead, this way, it's both fullbacks that have inverted. And then, as I said, Dunk can push higher. I mean, there's nothing stopping one of the wider centre-backs pushing higher, or there's also nothing stopping Minter coming into the half space, Walker-Peters providing width, and then maybe like Mats Pfeiffer staying deep. This is also something we could see, and this is where I talk about rotations. If Walker-Peters starts making this run, Minter has to make this run, and Pfeiffer has to make this run, so that all the positions are still covered. And I do think it's a pretty modern style of play. We see like what Thiago Motta did at Bologna. It's very similar in this progressive, positional style of play, but it's also very fluid. And I think it's going to work well in the Premier League. I think it's going to confuse defences quite a lot, but we'll go back into this shape. This is how they like to attack. On the ball, you're going to see a lot of this kind of passing, find the centre-back, maybe he's a bit deeper, and he's going to progress it forward, where you can then find, oh, I was meant to move the ball there, the line-breaking passes like this, or play the switch out wide for Mitoma to then attack the byline, get across into the box for the likes of João Pedro. We'll get ready to see a lot of them patterns of play. Now, in defence, as I said, the wing-backs have to be comfortable defending wide, and that's because they do defend in that 3-4-3 that we saw earlier, this 3-4-3 that we spoke about. They defend pretty much like this, just they drop the wing backs a bit deeper, so it becomes almost like a 5-2-3 in a mid and low block. Maybe not a low block, just a mid block for now. It's a 5-2-3, and it's very similar to what Ruben Amorim uses. Obviously he was linked to Liverpool and Chelsea at times, but obviously he's doing really well with Sporting Lisbon at the moment, and his team defends in this 5-2-3 shape. The England video that I've just filmed that got my heart racing, we defended in a 5-2-3 shape. But the main Premier League manager that I like this formation that we see quite often is Oliver Glasner. I'm sorry, Brighton fans, for mentioning Crystal Palace in one of your videos. I apologise. But Oliver Glasner has been incredible for Crystal Palace since he's joined. And he also defends in this kind of shape. But I expect Brighton to defend like this. It's more of a zonal approach than a man-to-man approach. And we saw this at Sao Pauli. Last season, I think they averaged the second least amount of tackles per 90. They just let their opponent have the ball, knock it around, frustrate them by forcing them to play it wide into these kind of areas here. And even in these little gaps here, where they're almost just trapped. There's nowhere for them to go because the midfield and the centre of the pitch is really compact and narrow. Now, having said that, they are willing to counter-press high up the pitch as well to try and force a position turnover and get a chance really close to the opposition box. they are effective at pushing high, so Fabian Hurzeler will instill that into this team as well. If the ball is ready to be won in the opposition's attacking third, go and win it. Now, in a low block, Minter and Mitoma, or whoever's playing wide, probably will drop a bit deeper to a formation more like a 5-4-1. And it means that Minter and Walker-Peters, or obviously whoever is on that side, and the Estupiñán and Mitoma can double up to still maintain numerical overloads so that they're not outnumbered in 1 versus 1s. I do think that 2-3-5 shape that we could see will revolutionise the way that football is played in the Premier League. And obviously with the centre-back pushing higher, not only do you create a box midfield in the middle, but you get that extra man with that centre-back. And especially if then the striker drops deep as well, you really overload the centre of the pitch and isolate them wingers, which could be a really interesting tactic to see in the Premier League next season. The only thing I do worry about is how they're going to defend the wide areas and counter-attacks. I think maybe they're so narrow at the defence that covering the wider areas on either side of the centre-backs will be difficult, but when you've got someone like Walker-Peters who can get back quickly, that's not too big of a worry. Obviously, if it's Solly March, then maybe you have different... you worry a bit more about it. Having said that, I do think Hurzeler was a really good appointment. It will take him time to implement these tactics, and obviously he needs signings that are going to fit his style, but I do think it will work, and I do think it'll be really exciting to watch. But let me know down below, what do you think about Hurzeler in the Premier League? What signings do you think that he needs to make for this Brighton team? But in the meantime, if you want to go and watch that video on why Chelsea did snatch Dewsbury Hall from Brighton, go and check that video out here, see why I think that they signed him and how he could fit into that team under Maresca. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.